We begin this news hour in Beijing, where French President Emmanuel Macron is urging China's Xi Jinping to reason with Russia to help bring an end to the war in Ukraine. The leaders have been meeting to discuss the conflict. President Macron is on a 3-day state visit, and he's been joined by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The talks are expected to set the tone for the EU's future relationship with its largest trading partner. Arise chief correspondent John Cookson has the story.
A fanfare for the French President Emmanuel Macron as he's greeted by China's leader Xi Jinping. Ahead of today's summit, French sources were saying Macron wanted to dissuade Xi from supporting Russia over the invasion of Ukraine, but no one, including Macron himself, expects a major change in China's position.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
That didn't stop him pressing home the point in the first face-to-face meeting with Xi. Macron said he could count on China to reason with Russia and bring everyone back to the negotiating table. Russian aggression, he said, had dealt a blow to international stability. Xi's response was general and non-committal, the Chinese leader having recently told Putin that China and Russia had a friendship with no limits. He told Macron only that both China and France had the ability and responsibility to maintain world peace and stability. This visit by Macron is also about boosting trade between China and France and mending ties between the EU and Beijing. Macron arranged for EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to accompany him on the 3-day trip. Relations between Brussels and Beijing are at a low ebb, not only over China's support for Russia, but also over its poor human rights record, so there was some serious fence mending to do when she met with China's Premier Li Qiang.
It is important, more important than ever, that we talk to each other and keep lines of communication open. We are major trading partners. The European Union is China's largest export market, while China is our third largest. And while we need to address some critical imbalances in our economic relationship, China and the European Union must also cooperate closely on the most pressing global challenges.
At the signing of an accord, Macron once again pressed home the impact the war in Ukraine was having, saying the security of Europe was not guaranteed as long as Ukraine is occupied. John Cookson, Arise News.
And John Cookson joins me now from London for more. Good to see you, John. President Macron there, as you said in your package, sounding quite strident, calling on China to bring Russia to its senses. Given that China has aligned itself with Russia for very strategic reasons, a lot of it related to its battle with the US and the West, is it likely that Beijing will put that kind of pressure on Moscow?
Hi, Charles. Good to see you. Well, no, the answer to that is definitely not. Only last month she was talking to Putin in Moscow, and as a result of that meeting, we had this change in the world order, in fact, of this alignment between Russia and China, two massive nations on Earth, and this, I believe, is going to be the future. This Chinese dominance in the coming years. So, although Macron can do his best to try to persuade Xi to bring them to the negotiating table, but what's the point? There's nothing to negotiate at the moment. There's no credible peace plan that anyone's come up with, including Xi and his 12-point plan, for people to talk about. And even before you have that, you have to have a ceasefire. And the absolute opposite is happening in Ukraine at the moment. Both sides, Russia and Ukraine, are planning offensives. The Russian one already underway. I checked tonight, and the fighting in Bakhmut is as fierce as it ever was. with thousands of soldiers dying on a weekly basis in that part of the world. So Ukraine is still at war, and you can't get people to a negotiating table until you have a ceasefire and there's an agreed peace plan. Now, the Chinese peace plan is all very well, but basically it says that the Russians can keep what land they've got, which, the leader of Ukraine and the leaders of the Western world would never accept, especially because of the war that's happened in the last year or so. So, as I say, Macron can do his best, but he's not going to change Xi's mind. I'm sure of that.
So the upshot really is that Mr. Macron's state visit won't make any difference to the war in Ukraine. Nevertheless, Mr. Macron seeming on the face of it to focus very much on Ukraine and trade deals, but not so much on human rights. And it doesn't look like he's going to bring up things like Xinjiang, where Muslims are reportedly being repressed in China.
Yes, but there are more talks to be had, and the two leaders will be having more talks in the next day or so, and maybe this will. In fact, I think it will come up. I mean, Macron can't go to China and not raise the question of the Uyghurs and the persecution. Some would say the genocide of the Muslim minority in China. I'm sure Ursula von der Leyen, who's on this trip with Macron, wouldn't hold back in other bilateral talks with other Chinese ministers, including the Prime Minister. She may have already mentioned it already. So there are other topics for discussion, and not only that, North Korea, I imagine, is high on the agenda, and what to do about Kim Jong-un, who was displaying new nuclear prowess only last week. So there are behind-the-scenes talks going on, Charles, and maybe privately Macron will raise these issues with Xi direct at that time.
And just returning to that nettlesome issue of the war in Ukraine and the overtures being made by Emmanuel Macron in China, I wonder what's been the reaction from Russia. What have they been saying?
Well, the Russians, as you said in the intro, have said that the war will continue. The scenario is not right for negotiating at the present time, and this is a constant theme that we hear from the Russians. A couple of stories have emerged today which are worth mentioning, and they both surfaced in newspapers. The first was the Financial Times, which was reporting that the Ukrainians were prepared to discuss Crimea if they were successful in retaking the land that the Russians have already seized. Now, that's the first time, if that story is true, that's the first time Ukraine has expressed an openness to that. The second, perhaps more interesting story emerged in the New York Times, which featured an interview with the Chinese ambassador to the EU, Fu King, and he said that the Chinese weren't backing Russia, and that in fact this closeness between Russia and China was a myth. Now, these are interesting stories, but is it possibly laying the groundwork for future peace talks? One hopes so, but it seems like a long shot. But two interesting stories around tonight.
Very interesting indeed. John, thank you very much. John Cookson, Arise Chief Correspondent there, talking to me from London about Emmanuel Macron's visit to China, China rolling out the red carpet, Macron calling on his Chinese counterpart to use his influence to end Russia's war in Ukraine.